This is my functional system in the Hobonichi Cousin and how I'm using it. This is the Spring Start Japanese edition, and I got this at the end of April, so I actually backfilled a bit of it, and that ended up being a great way to troubleshoot how I want to use these pages. But yeah, those might look a little less neat. I don't cover up any of these because I do often need to refer to past and future months and years. I've just marked some dates here for personal use. The yearly index is a contents page, very similar to how a lot of people use this, I think, but I'll get more into how this works once we get to the daily pages. The monthly spreads I use as calendars, so I note down appointments, events, and anything I want to keep track of doing, like big cleaning tasks so that I'll know when I did it last and when I'll need to do it next time. I also mark some spending here just to be able to get a more clear view of it within the context of the month, along with my total monthly expenses down here, which I've covered up for the time being. On the side, initially, I wanted to put down a focus for each week because my weeklies are very full with tasks and often tasks for different projects. I felt like this would be a great space to decide on one main thing I want to focus on this week. So if I ever get overwhelmed or a little lost with trying to make progress on multiple ongoing projects, I can always go back here and remember that just for this week, let's try to focus on this one thing. But I don't know that it's worked all that well in practice, mostly because I often change my mind about what my focus is for the week. It was actually easier to backfill February and March because I remember what I ended up focusing on those weeks mostly. But as I'm a real-time planner and not so much focused on memory keeping or anything like that, that's not very functional for me. I'm thinking about trying to keep this weekly focus and then coming back and adding what I actually ended up focusing on after the week has ended, which will hopefully help me decide what to do the week after that. For example, here I wrote down what I wanted to focus on, then I put down an arrow and wrote down what I ended up doing that week. I feel like that would be pretty functional and useful to figure out next week's focus, so I might do that moving forward. Let me know if anyone has any ideas for the sidebar. I'd really like to hear them. So let's go to the weekly spread. The weekly spread is all of my tasks for the week. I don't use these dates because I hate migrating tasks from day to day, so I divided them up based on categories or projects. I just write the categories up here. I find this much more useful to be able to find what tasks are open in one project, for example, or what chore I can get done when I have a spare moment. It's also very flexible because I can have different categories or projects every week depending on what I need to focus on. I've used the system for a while, so I'm very used to it and it works very well for me. Now, while I don't use the dates for these columns, I do need it for some date-specific events, and I use the left sidebar here for that. Since there's this calendar that lines up pretty well with the grid, I just mark the square that indicates the day of the week and write the event underneath. This is actually extremely functional for me because I have a lot of rescheduled events that I can easily just mark the new rescheduled date in the same row, given that it's still the same week. I also mark some day-specific notes here, like medical symptoms I'm trying to keep track of, and my spending along with total weekly expenses, which I've also covered up. Up here is a habit tracker, though I always think of it more as a daily to-do list. It's just some things I need to do every day that I don't want to have to write out each morning, like moisturizing and medical stuff. So before this, I had been bullet journaling for a while, so all of my symbols are somewhat based off bullet journaling. I actually can't remember what the original bullet journal symbols are since I've adapted them to fit my use for so long. But basically, the way I use it, dots are open tasks, and then I cross them off when I'm done. A circle is an event, and I fill it in if they're canceled or rescheduled, and put a line through it if it's done. This circle is something I find very useful and versatile across my system because the circle has come to mean two things. A circle is something that's actionable, an event that I need to be aware of and prepare for, and I'll put a line through it when it's done. And a filled in circle is something not actionable, like a canceled event or a note about a specific day. And I can turn an actionable task into one that's not, like when an event is canceled, by simply filling it in. I think I might have picked this up and altered it from Lindsay's Scribbles here on YouTube as well. I also have a $sign for spending, and in the task list, I use a circled exclamation mark for notes so that it'll be more visible. So let's go to the daily pages, and I use them as notes, as I think a lot of people do. Like I said, this cousin is more functional and not necessarily for memory keeping. Though these notes are notes that I refer back to all the time, and I do want to keep them long term, so I suppose it's project memory keeping in that sense. Either way, I decided to divide up the types of notes and projects using the months provided. The problem I was having with my notebooks, or I guess they were bullet journals, is that whatever note I needed would be buried in the middle of a million other things, and since a lot of my projects are long term, they'd be spread across multiple pages that are scattered across the book, and I'd have to keep referring back to my index and then flipping back and forth between pages that are like hundreds of pages apart sometimes. I'm hoping that confining projects to these specific months will help with that problem. And even if I do still have to flip back and forth a little bit, it'll just be within those 30 pages of the month. Another useful thing here is the colored tabs for each month that Hobonichi has on the side. Having decided which month or color is what project or category, I'll be able to easily flip to the right section easily to get what I need. So I've put my everyday logs, as I call them, in the first section, which is April. This has things like my wish list, my expense logs, and as it's the first month of the daily pages, it'll be easily accessible. These are pretty bare because I've just moved in, but this will be my most frequented section. The second section, May, is the first type of project that I work on. I've allocated 3 sections all through July for this type of project. Usually I'm working on a few at a time, so I'm hoping this will mitigate that problem of having one continuous set of notes getting broken up into pages that are separated by other non-related projects. So every time I work on project A, I'll write it in May, and then when I'm working on project B, it'll be in June, and so on. That way the notes of each project will always stay together. And realistically, by the time I'll need space to start on a new project and its set of notes, 1 or 2 of these ongoing ones will be finished, and I can start writing after those pages. I hope that makes some sort of sense. After these sections, I have my second project category in August. Usually I'm only working on one thing at a time for this, so I feel pretty comfortable keeping it in one section. It's already helpful enough that it won't be scattered through the book. Just as an example, so maybe what I'm saying will make more sense. In my old books, if I had a project for this section, I'll just start taking notes on it on the next available page. And then I'll have, for example, a shopping list I need to write down, and I'll write that on the next page. And 2 days later, I'm working on the project again, but I'll have to continue on the next available page, which is like 2 shopping lists and a reading journal entry away from where my last notes on it were, for example. Hopefully that maybe clears things up. Anyway, speaking of the reading journal, that's probably the closest thing I do to journaling. And I have that here in September. I've set aside 2 months for it because I do journal as I read and they can get pretty long. I'm a little worried, honestly, that this might not be enough, but there are always more pages and sections, and I'm sure I'll be fine. I was too busy to read in April, so I don't have an entry here yet, but if you want to walk through of how I use a reading journal, I'd be happy to share in another video. Anyway, let's move on to November, which is actually another project section. This project doesn't usually require any notes on paper. A lot of it is digital and pretty disposable once it's been used. So I only keep the few static notes I do need to refer back to from time to time because there are some. This, for example, is a schedule for the project. And because it's a particularly long-term project, I feel the section will be pretty useful in the long run. December is where I have all of my miscellaneous notes. So this is where I would keep shopping lists, packing lists, a blank page for whatever ad hoc needs. So that's just the last month here. There are these 2025 months at the back, and I'll be using them to overflow into for whatever I need. Most likely they'll be used for project notes or my reading journal to overflow into. Alright, I hope that all makes sense, so let's go back to the yearly index. As I mentioned, I use this as a contents page, and I just fill in the title for each note and the date here. I put down the category for each section down here, as I've just explained. April for everyday logs, my first type of projects, my second type of projects, my reading journal, my third project, and miscellaneous notes. Now, sometimes I do have multiple projects on one page, especially in the section here for my first type of projects. I just write them both down and call it a day. I do try to keep it to no more than 2 though, because I have these markers and I want to keep them functional. Some of these are tailored to the specific section and category. For example, in the reading journal, there's an M for monthly spreads, which are monthly recaps I like to do at the end of the month of what genres I read, how many pages, favorites, etc. But there are a few markers that are universal across my system as well. This chevron sign is to indicate that this note continues on a different page, which I can then look through the section and see the next page where this project continues. Like I said, this was the kind of thing I had to do in my old books, and I hope I'll need to do this last year, but I have a feeling it'll happen, so I've got that there when it's applicable. C is for completed, so when a project is finished, and R is for reference. This is for things I need to reference often. The everyday logs do fall into this category, but since they're already grouped into the first section, I just mark the ones I go back to most, like my expense log. But there are specific notes in my projects that I refer back to a lot. For example, certain instructions that I use every time I get to a specific stage in a project, or a schedule for a long-term project, or even my to-read list from my reading journal that I would need to go back to when looking for my next read. Like I said, I only keep at most 2 items on one page, and that's because there are 5 markers at most for each item, and 1 row has 10 columns. So I'll still be able to mark 2 different things at a time. I just use a blue colored pencil for these markers because they're legible but unobtrusive, so I can still read the index itself. I don't think they're showing up well on camera, but they're very clear in person. I thought about using a highlighter, but I only have a bright blue one, and it's too much for me to still be able to read the text over top. I also hate how when you dot something with highlighter, there's a darker pool of ink in the middle. It's way too obtrusive for my eyes. But yes, the way these markers work, I'll be able to tell the state of the project just from this overview, if they're completed or reviewed or whatever else, which are what the symbols stand for. I do have a key of them, which is on the Turning the Page to a New Year spread, I think is what it's called. I don't keep a key of my everyday symbols like the circles and dots because I've used those for years and I don't need a key, but since these are very tailored to the different sections, even though they're pretty intuitive, like I've put R for reference and I've placed them at the end of the row so they're easy to find. There are a lot of different markers, so I've got it down here just in case. I also marked the number of boxes and spaces to make it easier for myself for figuring out layouts. I think I picked this up from Rocky Paper Scissors Co. here on YouTube, and it's super useful so far. For the back pages of the Cousin, I haven't quite decided what I'll do for these. I might use them for the end of the year to look back and see what I've managed to do this year. I don't love the idea of marking, for example, my favorite book of each month here in the 12 squares because sometimes everything I read in a month are duds, or there are multiple amazing books in one month, or I'm too busy to read for the month like I was in April. So I think 12 favorite books at the end of the year would make more sense. Maybe I'll do the same for my 100 page. I can list my completed projects here, but I don't love duplicating information and I can already see that from my yearly index. So let me know how you have used these pages or are planning to. I'm honestly really curious. Maybe there are some functional ways I can use these. Please share your ideas if you have them because I don't really have any so far. So that's all for my functional system in the Hobonichi Cousin. I'm enjoying it so far and I hope this made some sense. Please let me know if you have any questions, and I'd really like to hear about your analog systems, whether it be for planning or for memory keeping. Thank you for watching.